Okay, and welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed that stretch. And now we're going to be bringing you wonderful speakers on helping children cope with divorce. A moderated session. It's going to be moderated by Lydia Velasco Mayock, who is a wonderful English-Spanish bicultural counselor working at a school here in Northern California. She holds a license as a clinical social worker and has worked for many years helping families and children, supporting students going through many difficult transitions such as reunification, separation, and divorce. She also has vast experience of helping children who have experienced trauma, and she serves on a number of groups, including understanding cultural transitions and adapting to family transitions. So Lydia will be moderating this session, and she will be joined by Lynn Kasela-Kapusinski, who is a licensed clinical professional counselor, pastoral counselor, and a leading figure in the Catholic pastoral care of children, helping specifically children of divorce and separation. Lynn is the president and founder of the Faith Journeys pastoral care programs to facilitate children's healing in a Catholic context, and she also happens to be a child of divorce who has been happily married for nearly 2 decades. She's also a well-known author and has written a number of books, and her work has been recognized by the Pope as well as through various different radio and online sessions. The next speaker, who Lydia will be moderating, is Joey Pontarelli. And Joey is a child of divorce, and he started Restored to help other children of divorce. Restored gives teens and young adults the practical advice that they need to cope, heal, and grow from the trauma of their parents' divorce or separation so that they can feel whole again. He's spoken across the US and abroad, and his articles have been featured on the Chastity Project, Focus, and Shalman Tidings magazine. Joey lives in Colorado with his wife Bridget, and we're happy to welcome all three of the speakers for our next session.
Hello, everybody. This roundtable has the goal of bringing awareness on how divorce affects the children when the family unit no longer is wholesome. Sometimes the divorce happens and it breaks different cycles of different kinds of violence or abuse or addictions. Other times, circumstances make the parents make those decisions, and it happens across the lines of socioeconomic differences, cultural, religious, racial. So it affects many sectors, many families in our society. It seems to be a more common problem today, and we know it affects everybody, but we are going to focus here on how it affects the children. So I am going to share a little bit about my personal experience, which is that I also have gone through divorce and I know it affects children. I am the mother of 3. And I also have seen how it affects children since I work as a school counselor. That's one of the situations that affects children. There are 2 experts, 2 studious people accompanying me in this panel, and they will talk a little bit about their experience, but mainly they have published work about this topic, and with their guidance we are going to cover different aspects on how divorce affects children. So we hope that we bring information and tools that help parents in supporting their children in dealing with divorce issues, and everything turns out in a positive way. We hope the children will lead successful lives, regain trust, and will be able to make fulfilling relationships in their lives. So here is Lynn, and she will talk a little more, and then Joy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Kapusinski. I'm so delighted to be here with you today. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I've been working with divorced families in schools and parishes and agencies for about 10 years. I'm also a child of divorce. My parents separated when I was 11, divorced when I was 15, but I'm fortunate to be happily married for almost 19 years, which I think shows that there's definitely a new beginning, new life, and new hope that's available. And we're just so pleased to have you with us today.
And we have Joy.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Joey Panarelli. A little bit about me. I know you heard our bios, but a little about my story. The most painful day of my life was the day when my parents separated, and I still remember what it felt like. It was a warm spring day. My mom sat me and my siblings down to break the news. I was 11 years old, so just like Lynn. And she told me and my siblings that dad would no longer be living with us. In fact, they were getting divorced. And for an 11-year-old boy, I didn't know what to do with that news. I didn't know how to cope with it. And my whole world just seemed to shatter in that moment. And so all I could do was just hide in the closet and cry. And sitting there in that closet, I felt a million emotions. But I was primarily worried. I was worried about my parents and what they were going through and what would happen to them. I was also worried about my siblings and me, what would happen to us now. And I couldn't have put this into words then, but I felt a bit. I felt abandoned. I felt unwanted, and I felt like I wasn't good enough. And so, following that day, I became very bitter, angry, resentful, and acted out in all sorts of ways. And in an attempt to numb the pain that I was experiencing, I turned to pleasure. My best friend at the time introduced me to pornography, and so I fell into that for a while. And it kind of baffled me because in the moment it felt good, but then afterward I just felt so empty. And even as a boy, I knew that I wanted to be happy, and I knew that this wasn't making me happy. Thankfully, I heard a speaker by the name of Jason Everett, who you may have heard of, who really helped me break free from that bad habit and to live a life of sexual integrity. And so I started making changes in my life. I also got some new friends. The people I was hanging around with weren't good for me. And so the new friends that I had, they were much better. They were happier people. They were faithful people. And so that helped turn things around in my life. But even in that situation, I still felt broken. I still felt broken. And I looked around also and I saw how my siblings were struggling. I saw how close friends of mine who were going through their parents' divorce were struggling. And it baffled me that there was nothing much that I knew of at the time to help people like us, because this was so common. Later, I learned that each year over 1 million American children suffer the divorce of their parents, and that's not to mention the other countries in the world. And so it really began this journey for me of searching for solutions, searching for answers for people like me. And so years later, I started an organization called Restored, and we help teenagers and young adults who come from broken homes to learn how to cope, heal, and grow so that they can feel whole again. We give them practical guidance and the support that they need. And so I'm really honored to be with you here today. Unlike Lynn and unlike Lydia, I don't have professional training in this. I'm actually a businessman. But I've been wrestling with this stuff for 15 years. I've done over 10 years of mentorship, 5 years of counseling. And for the past 4 years, I've been building Restored and researching this topic and listening to people like me. And so I'm so excited to be here with you today. I also am married. I've been married about 2.5 years at this point. And so, like Lynn said, for any of you who may be discouraged hearing some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, there's so much hope. And I hope that you feel that throughout this presentation. And at the end, you walk away with some very practical things that you can do to help your children cope and heal. And so with that, I want to throw it back to Lydia to dive in some of the questions that we've received.
Yes, thank you, Joy. And definitely you two are experts in the topic. Joy and Lynn, how do you see that divorce affects children? Besides your personal experience, what you have studied, what can you share?
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in here. So we prepared a little bit of the research for you guys, just a bite-sized bit for you. But before I get into the research, I just want to say to any parents who are watching right now who maybe are divorced, who are coming from a very bad situation, I just want you to know that we're not here to condemn you in any way by what we're sharing. The reason I say that, often when parents hear the really difficult things that their children go through when there's a breakup, when there's a divorce, it can be very discouraging, and it can feel like people are, looking down on you and condemning you. That's not our stance at all. That's not what we're trying to do here. We actually just want to help you to help your children. And so just know that I've never met a parent who wanted to hurt their children by getting divorced. I think most parents just aren't aware of the effects that divorce can have on the children, and they're not aware of what they should do about it. And so that's what we want to do, is give you some awareness, because before you can help your children, you really need an awareness of what they're going through. If you don't understand them, there's no way you can help them. And so that's what we want to help you understand today. But know that, kind of brace yourself. Some of this stuff, if you've never heard the research, is kind of difficult to go through. So in speaking about the research, Dr. Paul Amato, who is really one of the foremost experts on children of divorce, and he's done a bunch of research on them. He's at Penn State University. He found that children of divorce are more likely to have social problems, behavioral problems, difficulty in their relationship with their parents, difficulty in romantic relationships. They're more likely to get divorced themselves. They have higher frequency of depression and violence. They're at higher risk for suicidal attempts. They've reduced physical health, lower levels of success in school, more emotional problems, and they have lower self-esteem. And this wasn't just like one study that found it, one or two studies. This is actually a meta-analysis study published in the Journal of Family Psychology. And if you're not familiar with what a meta-analysis study is, basically, instead of conducting their own study, researchers will look at studies that have already been conducted on a particular topic and then summarize the findings. And this study summarized the findings of 67 different studies on children of divorce. Another researcher who spent many years studying the effects of divorce on the children is Dr. Judith Wallerstein. And she actually wrote a book called The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. And what she did is she studied children of divorce for 25 years. It's the longest study we have up to this point. And she took 131 young people from 60 families. And one important detail about the study, she only chose children who never had any emotional or developmental problems prior to the divorce. And then she observed the effect that the divorce had on them and compared them to their peers from intact families. And after years of researching this, she said that our findings challenge the myth that divorce is a transient crisis, and that as soon as parents reestablish their lives, the children will recover fully. That doesn't happen. In her research, she found many of the same things that Dr. Paul Amato mentioned. She found that children of divorce were less likely to get married. They were more likely to get divorced. They were less likely to have children. They were much more likely to heavily use drugs and alcohol during high school. They were less likely to finish high school, less likely to go to college, and more likely to drop out. And they were far less likely to receive financial support from their parents. And also, kind of interesting, that the men were far less likely to enter into a romantic relationship. And just kind of realizing the devastation in the lives of these children, Dr. Judith said, our parents like to believe that if they are unhappy in their marriage, the children will also be unhappy. Conversely, if divorce is better for them, it will be better for the children. But things don't work that way. Children frequently do not share their parents' unhappiness with a problematic marriage, while divorce brings pain into their lives that until now has gone unrecognized. We are allowing the children to bear the psychological, economic, and moral brunt of divorce. That's a difficult paragraph to swallow. So bear with me here. But it's so telling, and it's so important that we understand that if we do want to help our children through this experience. And two of the key takeaways from her research. One, she said that the full effects from divorce actually aren't experienced until adulthood. It's called the sleeper effect, which Lynn is going to get into more. And the place that those effects show up the most is in our relationships, especially our romantic relationships. And the basic reason for that is because we don't have a roadmap for love. We don't have a good model of what love and marriage is supposed to look like, because we've seen a broken model from our parents. And so when it's our turn, we feel lost, we feel alone, we struggle in numerous ways in our relationships. And there's absolutely hope. I don't want you to lose sight of that, but it's important that we understand the problem before we get to the solution. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Lynn, who's going to talk a little bit more about the sleeper effects and some other things.
Just to start, girls and boys typically cope very differently. As Joey mentioned about boys acting out, they tend to be a little bit more aggressive. They might tease other children, especially a younger sibling. Maybe they get argumentative with their mother about doing chores, or conveniently forget to do the chores. Some boys will, just to get under their mother's skin, they might adopt characteristics of their father that irritate the mom. But boys also too can act in a very different way, where they start to take an interest in something that their father really cares about, and that's a way of maintaining a connection to him. But girls, on the other hand, they tend to cope. Their coping efforts are directed mostly towards relationships. So they're going to tend to push that anger and sadness, and they're going to focus on being very helpful and cooperative with parents. However, that runs the risk of putting them in an enmeshed relationship with their parents, where maybe they listen excessively to problems or they do too much chores at home. And that can both increase their anxiety as well. So I definitely fell into that enmeshed parent, which some researchers refer to as the perfect child parent. I wanted to make straight A's in school and never get into trouble and do all the chores at home. And that caretaking was my way of keeping my family together. So what happened for me, and what can happen for girls in general, is that initially after separation or divorce, they tend to be faring really well. And a lot of friends of our family would say, boy, Lynn is doing great. She's handling this divorce just very well. But the reality was that I hadn't even come to terms with any of it. And then, like Joey said, it pops up. It can pop up later in life when girls start dating, entering a committed relationship. And that's what Judith Wallerstein, who is a pioneer in divorce research, called the sleeper effect. And what she says is that it manifests itself by intense anxiety and fear about betrayal. And according to Wallerstein, in young adulthood, this is when girls may choose wrong because they're afraid to choose right. So, in other words, they're protecting themselves from future abandonment or betrayal. And so they may date men that they're not afraid of losing, or they don't care about losing. That way they can't get hurt a second time. And I really feel the sleeper effect is a very major reason why the divorce rate for women tends to be particularly high. And some researchers estimate that to be about 60%.
And this is really important to keep in mind how the roles in the family shift and how each child takes the best way to protect themselves at the same time. So, as a parent, what tips can we offer to the parents in dealing with the children? Is it more difficult when they are younger? Will that affect also older children? So, what can you let us know?
Well, sure. I think it's really important. You want to start that conversation about the divorce and revisit it regularly with the child, because they need to know they have permission to talk about it. They also need to know, how's it going to affect their day-to-day lives. How often will they be seeing that other parent? When will they be seeing the other parent? For younger children, you can have a calendar where they mark the days that that's going to happen. Will they be going to their same school, living in their same house? Will mom or dad be working longer hours now to make more money, given the decreased finances that families can have? With younger children, typically like grades 3 and younger, you want to use what are called displacement techniques. And that's where the parent can read a book about divorce with the child or watch a movie about divorce. Some children respond very well to play techniques, a puppet or a doll. And what that does is it normalizes the sharing, and it takes the pressure directly off the child, because it's difficult for them with their developmental level and their inability to really articulate, as well as older children. It can be tough for them to have that one-on-one conversation about the divorce. You can also try a more effective, like an educational approach. Children are so used to being in school and learning about subjects. So explain to them, what does separation and divorce mean? With older children, ask them, what do they think it means? And then clarify the misconceptions for them. You can also try, if you notice your child maybe being quieter or more angry or what have you, to just quote your observations to them and say, boy, I'm noticing that you're quieter than usual. Is something bothering you? And just open up the door that way to see what they might say. If the child does share, it's so important to listen and really validate his feelings. It's that validation that will help the child move through his feelings. And this is kind of counterintuitive because we all feel that, my goodness, if we focus on the anger, the sadness, that's going to intensify the feeling. But actually what it does is it helps the child process the feelings so they can move through it and feel other feelings. So you can do this simply by saying something like, I hear how unhappy you are about your dad's new girlfriend. You wish that he would spend time with just you alone. And then you want to check in with the child. Am I getting that right? And he will share more if he feels that it's safe to do so. You can also model the sharing for him. Let him know that, sometimes you're maybe having a difficult day. Of course, that doesn't mean sharing all kind of details or letting your child see you fall apart emotionally, but simply saying, today was a really difficult day for me. I heard this song on the radio. I started having a memory of a time I had with your father, and it was hard for me. Sometimes I feel I'm going through this divorce well, but then other times something will set me back a little bit. And that's okay. Again, you're modeling for children that it's okay to admit their feelings, and their feelings don't have to overwhelm them, because children will be looking to you, the parent, for how to grieve the right way. So with any of these approaches, just be patient and keep in mind that just like you, children move through grief at their own rate. A lot of times it'll be much, much slower than you as an adult will move through it, but that's okay. It might take some time, a lot more time than you would like, but just be patient and have faith that when the child is ready and able, they will ask you questions or share what they need to share. So let your child take the lead and to let you know when they're ready and how much they want to share. And if they don't say anything, simply let them know I'm here for you. And if you'd like to speak with me at another time, I'm happy and ready to do that.
So it seems like communication is really important. So there are other factors, and I think Joy has something important to share with us about faith.
Yeah, I know there's people of different faith here, maybe people who don't even believe in God. We just want to talk a little bit about my personal experience. So I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, and faith has made such an impact on my life, especially in handling my parents' divorce. And like I mentioned when I was sharing my story, the people that I met who were very faith-filled were very joyful and happy, and they lived very balanced lives. They had good habits in their lives, and at that time, I was miserable. I really was miserable. Just and again, looking at the pornography and doing other things that just were not healthy. And so I started to change. I wanted to be happy, and I noticed that they were happy, so I wanted to be like them. And so I started to develop a prayer life, a relationship with God, deep intimacy with God. I started to learn more about God, to learn about my faith, to read scripture and things like that. I also started to just build virtues, build those good habits in my life. And that made all the difference. I became so much happier, and I found so much healing in the arms of God, in the arms of Jesus. And just knowing that he's a God who can relate with our suffering. That's something that I think is so important. And we won't get into that as much maybe today. But for me, I often struggle with the question, God, when I was suffering in the midst of all these things that were happening, where were you? And I honestly, it felt like he was just watching from a distance, just standing on the sidelines, observing me kind of get kicked in the face. And over years, it took me a long time, a lot of prayer, a lot of spiritual coaching to actually realize that he was actually right there in the midst of it with me. He was there with that 11-year-old Joey sitting in the closet crying with me, saying, I don't want it to be this way. I don't want it to be this way. And I'm right there with you. And so one priest, Father Mike Schmitz, he says that sometimes God's only response to our pain is his presence. And so God might not come in and give you a solution, but he will be with you through it all. And for me, that's made all the difference, just having that awareness. And I've noticed in my own life, the closer that I am to God, the closer that I am in my prayer life, the closer that I am in my going and making use of the sacraments, the happier I am, the happier I am. And so I've just made this choice to live a life of virtue, to live a life of faith. And that's made all the difference. And it's helped me heal so much as a child of divorce, on a spiritual level, just knowing that, often we kind of project, and Lynn may mention more about this. She knows a lot about it. We may often project our image of God, our parents' image onto God. And because as children, we, think that our parents are the most powerful creatures that we know. And so if they're like that, then God must be like that too. And so we often have this distorted image of God. So one of the things that I had to do is kind of undistort that, to purify what I thought of God and to really meet him for who he is. And so it has made all the difference for me in my life.
Thank you, Joy. That's really inspirational. So as we have heard and as we know, the divorce is the loss of one of the parents, and it brings grief, it brings pain. So there is a natural reaction to pain, but when do we need to look for professional help for our children?
I could address that if you'd like. I always recommend counseling as a preventative measure before those unhealthy coping patterns can become ingrained, and then they're going to be more difficult to remedy. A great place to start, of course, talk with your child's school counselor. Let them know what the situation's like in your family, have them meet with your child, and that way they can touch base with your child throughout the school year. And it's kind of just a nice way to introduce your child to counseling. And the school counselor can let you know if there are any troublesome behaviors at school or things that might warrant outside intervention. Also inquire about a group program for your child at the school or the parish or the church that you belong to. Groups are just ideal in helping children feel less alone. And research shows that children are going to open up more readily in a group than they will even in individual or family counseling, because they have that strength in numbers with the group. Outside counseling, really, beyond that, if it's warranted, if your child's developmental progress is being interfered with, their adjustment is being significantly interfered with. The benchmark is the frequency, the duration, and the severity of your child's symptoms. So, for example, sleep difficulties are very common when there's a loss. Now, if your child, it's been months and your child still will not sleep alone in his bed or is having persistent nightmares, then that's a time when you're going to want to check that out with a professional. Many families, since the pediatrician might know your child well, that can be a great place to start. Or again, trying to find a family therapist, someone that you feel comfortable with. And I often suggest meeting with that therapist yourself first as the parent, because in knowing your child, you will probably know who your child's going to best connect with. And that's just so important, having that rapport in order to have a successful counseling experience.
Thank you, Lynn. Remember, is in some districts, like in my district, it is a short term and it's just general. It's not in-depth counseling or therapy. So it is important to listen to the suggestions and maybe get outside help too. So, yes, Joy.
One thing I wanted to say is, just like Lynn said really well, and you too, Lydia, it's so important to just make sure that you're staying in touch with your child, that you're understanding what's happening through counseling. They may not want to discuss it much, but it's good to make sure you have a relationship with the counselor, like Lynn said, but then also you're hearing about things from your child. It often, if it's a counselor who maybe isn't the right fit with your child, or maybe they're not the most competent in helping children who come from broken homes, because there's many good counselors, and I don't want to put more of a stigma on counseling. That's not the purpose of this. Counseling has helped me so much. Like I mentioned, I've done more than 5 years of it. But it's important that we find someone who's the right fit. And if you don't, then you can go to somewhere else, like Lydia just said really well. So I've heard stories, again, they're kind of horror stories, of where someone really didn't understand how to treat someone who came from a broken home and was dealing with certain things, and they ended up doing more harm than good. I don't think that's usually always the case, but it can happen. And so it's important that we just stay in touch and understand what's happening in the counseling sessions. If you need to go somewhere else, you can do that too.
So what happens is that in school counseling is kind of like the first step, and basically the initial choice, and is whoever is the school counselor, that's the person that the student will see. And that person still has a training, and we, as school counselors in this district, we cannot go in depth and deal exactly. It's more about how that affects the school performance. And that's why I say it is important to look at or listen to the need for outside referral. So keeping that in mind and being aware that the parents might be upset with each other and there is hurt anyway, what do you think, Joy and Lynn, will be the common pitfalls parents need to avoid?
Well, certainly bad mouthing. Many parents have heard of bad mouthing, and that's when you're saying something derogatory about the child's other parent to the child. And that's so hurtful to children because remember, they love both their parents. They're part of both of their parents. So when they hear the bad mouthing, they're not only put directly in the middle of a conflict, but it's going to intensify that loyalty conflict that they already have when there's a divorce. So it's kind of a no-win situation for the child. And it takes a tremendous toll on them because they're repeatedly being asked to be disloyal to one parent or the other. So that can cause them a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And remember that on a deeper level, when you badmouth your child, badmouth your ex-spouse, you're badmouthing your child because your child is forever part of both of you. So again, children never get divorced from their divorced parents. And even when that parent is absent, or maybe there's a wonderful step parent that joins the family, the child's attachment to the biological parent, their longing to be in a close relationship with that biological parent remains. So it's also particularly hurtful to children when the same sex parent is being badmouthed. Dr. Warshak, who is a psychologist and author of the book The Custody Revolution, says that if a mother conveys a negative opinion of her ex-spouse to her son, it can actually do more damage to his self-esteem than the lack of contact with his father. So according to Warshak, rarely does a boy hold a negative opinion of his father without holding the same opinion of himself. So boys have been found to suffer much more negative ramifications than girls, partly for that reason.
And one thing I have noticed too is that the parent has a reason to be angry at the other parent for that reason, but that's not necessarily the same feeling of the child. And so for the child, the parent is the parent, and they see, especially if they are younger, the parent as a big hero. So no matter what, they will always love that other person. So it is important not to damage that at least positive part the child has in that situation. Thank you, Lynn. So what about the fact of sometimes the parent is angry, has too many things inside, doesn't have someone to share with, and then the children are the ones listening to all these emotions inside. So how does that affect children?
Well, of course, we know that parents need support, of course, for their grief journey as well. And that's why it's just so important to find something, whether it's counseling or a support group or what have you, because that's going to enable you to support your child that much better and prevent your grief from actually spilling over onto the child, inadvertently. And when that happens, we call it like a boundary violation because you could be confiding inappropriately with your child, relying on your child for some emotional support, essentially treating the child as a friend instead of a child. So it can be very tempting, because some children will willingly accept that role. They want to listen. They want their parent to be okay so they can go on their normal pursuits. So they may just step up to that role and listen and wanting to be there. But again, it's burdening the child. Some parents have told me they feel that, well, I'm being honest with my child, I'm being open with my child. However, while the child may want to know that information, again, they lack the maturity to process it. And given their dependence on the parent, it just becomes an enmeshed situation and it's just a very inappropriate burden to put on the child. So it's going to add to their stress. I know in my case, it made me focus more on my parents' grief and not my own grief. So it set me further back in doing the healing and the grief work that I needed to do. So just be good to yourself, get that sufficient support that you do need, and so you can move on. One other comment I want to make about the confiding is, I'm sorry, about the confiding in your child. Sometimes parents, understandably, they're afraid that the ex-spouse is going to hurt the child like the parent themselves has been hurt. But just know that sometimes that isn't always the case. The ex-spouse can be a better parent than he was a spouse to you.
There are other behaviors that can be negative. Joy, can you tell us a little bit about the child being the middle man or the middle person?
Absolutely. So this is something that I experienced. I've seen my siblings experience. I've seen friends experience, people, teenagers and young adults who we work with through Restored. And they're placed in the middle to pass messages from one parent to another or to coordinate certain things. And again, I remember when it came to visitation with my dad when I was younger, that was the case. My mom would tell us things, my dad would tell us things. We'd have to deliver those messages. And sometimes, similar to bad mouthing, they were included in them were some not nice things about the other parent. And so being in the middle, not only as like a messenger, but as someone who, again, loves both your parents, it can be incredibly conflicting because we often feel the need to pick a side. Because if mom is so angry at dad and dad is so angry at mom, how could I be neutral? I have to choose one side. And so it can just be so unhealthy. And I have heard this a lot that we feel this pressure. It's not just some kids feel that. I think it's almost always the case. And so it's so unhealthy. And as parents, you can do better. You can do so much better. There's so many practical things that you can do to avoid that. And like we were just discussing, the anger that's directed at your spouse, like I know you don't mean to harm the children in any way, but the anger that's directed at the spouse can often be taken out on the children. That's why this is so healthy. So even if you don't want to, one thing that we recommend is speak directly to your spouse. Speak directly to your spouse, or at least work up to that point where you can. And if for some reason that isn't possible, I know there's technology that you can use, different apps that maybe the court system has for you. You can use a mediator, whether that's a counselor, a friend, a family member, someone who can just be in the middle so that your kids don't have to be. And sometimes you'll need to pass information, maybe because of logistical reasons. You need to say one thing or another to your spouse through your child. That's okay if it's just minor logistical things. But when it comes to those more serious matters, it should never be passed through the child. It's really harmful. And there is certainly a better way.
Thank you. So the next part, after listening to the main ideas about how the children get affected, comes the hope, the resources. So I will encourage you, Lynn and Joy, to let us know about resources. And at the same time, after you say that, your final word for the presentation.
Well, sure. I hope parents will please consider my foundation as a resource. It's faithjourneys.org is my website, and it's journeys is JOURNEYS.org. I've authored 4 books for children. They are When Parents Divorce or Separate, which is for ages 8 to 12. Now What Do I Do, which is for teens. Making Your Way After Your Parents Divorce, which is for older teens and young adults. And earlier, I talked about using displacement techniques with children, and my books all open with a vignette, which is like a short story related to a specific area of divorce or separation. And some parents will read the vignette with their child, take turns reading it. The books also have journal prompts and activities in them, so your child can continue working on his or her own, maybe share those with you if they're ready to do so. So it kind of, again, normalizes that process. It's kind of like doing classwork in school. I also have a book and movie list on the shop tab of my website, which may be helpful for additional resources. And my most recent book is The Divorced Catholic's Guide to Parenting. And one of the sections I really love in that book is I call Meaningful Connection Time with Your Child. And it's very detailed roadmap for parents of how they can sit down one-on-one and talk with their child about various aspects related to the divorce. It's loaded with a lot of practical information. I do have sections for Catholic teachings and how those directly affect the divorce difficulties. And there's more information on my website about the resources, and I'm also planning to offer an online parent class. If anyone's interested, feel free to email me directly about that. Another excellent resource for young adult children and adult children of divorce is called Life Giving Wounds, and their website is lifegivingwounds, all one word, .org. They're a nonprofit here in Maryland, just doing tremendous work. They have very much grown into many dioceses across the country, giving weekend retreats that are very well received. So definitely encourage you, if your children are older or you know an older child of divorce, have them check out the website, the resources, and they also have a wonderful Facebook page as well.
And yeah, some of the resources on mine, I'm happy to talk about. But before I get to that, there was actually something I wanted to mention before when we were speaking about what parents can do to help their children to cope and to heal with the divorce. And so I just have 4 tips that I wanted to run through with you. And the first one is don't sugarcoat. Don't sugarcoat. And Lynn mentioned this a little bit. Basically, in an attempt to make us feel better, people may say, well, now you have 2 homes and you have twice as many Christmas and birthday presents and things like that. Again, I think they're well-intentioned, but the truth is those things could actually be harmful because often, usually, almost in every case, the child is hurt by the divorce or separation, even in cases where it may be necessary for the safety of the child, if there's abuse and things like that going on. It's still a difficult thing to go through. It hurts us. And so when people make light of it, we tend not to trust them because they obviously don't understand what we're going through. And so we often can feel, in addition to that, that something's wrong with us for feeling hurt because everyone else seems to be fine with what's happening. Why do I feel so sad? Why do I feel so angry? Why do I feel like no one's paying attention to me? And so then we start thinking, well, something must be wrong with me. And so instead of sugarcoating, what we can do is truly just call divorce what it is, a tragedy, a really difficult thing for a child to go through, something that really, shouldn't happen. It's just a reality of our broken world. And so that not sugarcoating and calling it what it is really helpful. Another thing that Lynn touched on too is validating the pain. And this is related to this first point. So the second tip really is to just validate their pain, to let them know that what they're feeling, what they're experiencing matters. And it's okay to feel those things. A friend recently told me a story of a little girl. She was playing on the playground during recess, and one of the teachers just noticed that she was kind of off on her own. And she started talking to her. And eventually the little girl confided in the teacher that her parents were getting divorced. And so the teacher, thankfully, she had some awareness about how difficult it can be for the children. And she said, "I'm so sorry you're going through that." And the little girl kind of just brushed it off and she said, "Oh, no, it's fine." And the teacher said, "No, it's not fine. Like, I'm really sorry you're going through that. It's not supposed to be this way." And the little girl just began crying. And she finally was able to open up and say, "No, this has been really, really difficult for me." And so it can be rare for someone to validate our pain. Another story, a girl I interviewed on our podcast at Restored just said that all of her teachers, all of her friends, family members, they all knew that her parents were separated, but no one really acted like anything was wrong with that, or no one really acted like it was a big deal. And she was really hurting inside. But again, everyone just acted like it was normal. And so she felt like, well, something maybe is wrong with me. And so just tell them it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel, rejected or like you're not good enough. All those things, the emotions that we often go through, it's normal given the situation. And so they really need permission to feel those things. The next tip is just tell them it's not their fault. For one reason or another, I'm sure Lynn's seen this a bunch in working with children. For one reason or another, we blame ourselves for things that happen in our families. And so we can honestly think that the divorce is our fault. I gave a talk about a year ago, and it was to a bunch of college students. And one of the college students came up afterward, and she said that her dad actually still blames her for the divorce that happened 10 years prior. And I doubt that the majority of parents are blaming their children, but it's so harmful because we think that, and then if someone says it is, of course, it can be double the harm. And so just make sure they know this is not your fault. This is between me and my spouse. This is not a reflection of you or anything you've done, and so on. And I think we really need to hear that, because often, even if we're not conscious of it, we can blame ourselves. The last tip is encourage them to journal. And there's a specific method to it. We won't be able to get into this as much, but I'll give you a resource at the end. Basically, writing can be incredibly healing, especially with Restored. We're focused on teenagers and young adults. They have more of that capacity, of course, than children to write. And so writing about what they're feeling, writing about what's going on, their deepest thoughts and emotions, can be incredibly healing. Dr. Susan David from the Harvard Medical School wrote an awesome book called Emotional Agility. And in that book, she just talked about the benefits of emotionally writing about emotionally significant events in your life. And in short, the studies, friends, just say that people who do that, they write about emotionally significant events in their lives, they have increase in physical and mental well-being. They're happier, they're less depressed, they're less anxious. And apparently there's been thousands of studies confirming this. And so buy them a journal, get them, some instruction on how to write. And we're actually writing a book about this. We're going to give them some really practical exercises specifically for people who come from broken homes on how they can express what they're feeling. And it can lead them to, again, feeling happier, less depressed, less anxious. So those are some tips in terms of resources. So one podcast I highly recommend is called The Place We Find Ourselves. The Place We Find Ourselves. This is produced by a counselor in Fort Collins, Colorado, named Adam Young. He's great. And episode 2, I would start with. He speaks all about trauma and about healing and makes it really practical for people to understand. So you could even recommend this to your child. But in episode 2, he speaks about the 6 core relational needs that we need our parents to fill. And so for you as a parent, it could be a great thing to listen to think, am I doing these things? How can I improve in the way that I'm filling these needs that my child has? And so that's a great resource. Layla Miller is an author who writes about children of divorce and just the effects it's had on them. She wrote a book called Primal Loss. Basically, she compiled 70 stories from adult children of divorce. She asked them 8 questions, and they just respond in an anonymous way on how their parents' divorce has affected them. It's a great book. It's a heavy book, again, but it's really insightful, and it can help you as a parent to know what your child's going through so you can help them. She just came out with another one too, called Impossible Marriages Redeemed. It's just a very hope-filled book of really messy, ugly situations where the marriage was really on the brink of ending, and through a series of events, they were able to rescue their marriage or continue on in a good way. And so related to that, there's another resource called the Alexander House, and the Alexander House is run by Greg and Julie Alexander, and they essentially offer marriage coaching. They themselves were on the brink of divorce. It was they were in a really difficult situation. They both were cheating on each other, and so just totally at the bottom of the barrel, like ready to give up, and everyone was really encouraging them to. But thankfully, they met someone a mentor who really gave them the tools that they needed to fight for their marriage and to thankfully save it. And obviously, it's not always possible. I'm not saying that, but I don't think there's enough resources out there to really help the couples who are struggling so that they don't get to the point in the first place to where they need to get divorced. So Greg and Julie are great. Last thing about Restored. So again, we work with teenagers and young adults from any faith background. We're not specifically a Catholic organization, but we also want to help anyone who loves or leads them. And so you can find out more at restoredministry.com. Again, restoredministry.com. Ministry is just singular. You can listen to the podcast, read the blog. We do speaking engagements, writing books, and we have online private community for young people. We're building a coaching network of counselors that we trust, that we recommend. And with the podcast, I definitely recommend episode 8, starting with that. There's some other articles that you can read. One of the articles that may be helpful for you listening is 10 tips to help your child, essentially, someone who's going through the parents' separation or divorce. And you can just Google how to help someone whose parents are divorced, and that will be on there. So that's all I have to offer. I know it's a bunch of resources. I hope that's helpful for you. And I hope you can help your child to cope and heal so that they can feel whole again and they can just thrive in life.
Thank you, Joy. And a reminder to all that they need to have help themselves first before we help the children. So finding support groups, finding your faith, being grateful for the things you have, having, if you pray, the prayers are important, and gratitude prayers especially important. So all the community resources available, family support groups, and support groups are really, really important. And all this information that Joy and Lynn have provided are wonderful. And there are other books also, and especially geared to Catholics, some by Liz Duffy and others, so are important to keep in mind. So there is hope, there is healing. You are not alone, parents, and it is possible to lead a successful and positive life. The same for the parents as for the children. Lynn, do you have anything else you want to say, or Joy, and then we conclude our roundtable?
Matt, it's definitely realistic to have hope. There is light, there's new life along the way, especially if you cling to your faith. This job as a parent, parenting your child through this difficulty is incredibly challenging. But the good news is that you're going to impact your child the most. So use your special role to make that very positive impact, that difference, and remember that God's grace and God's love is always there with you and is always going to prevail.
I just wanted to say that there's so much hope, like Lynn said. So if you feel discouraged, if you feel hopeless, please don't. I hope the practical advice and the resources that we gave you in this talk, in this roundtable, are helpful. What I would say is your children need you. They really need you. If you struggle, because divorce is a really difficult thing to go through yourself, if you struggle to be motivated to do certain things, do it for your children. Think of them, and you can compensate for those negative effects that we talked about if you're present to your children, you parent them well, you love them. And it's a messy situation, right? We can't avoid all the brokenness, but there's things that we can do to compensate for it. And just know that your children care about you too. There may be some anger that they feel or sadness, but they really care about you. We worry about you. I know I do. I know so many people I talk to worry about their parents. And so just know that your children need you. You can help them, and we're here to help you to help them, and we're here to help them also. And so please reach out, get in touch with us if there's anything that we can do to help you or to help your children.
So thank you very much, Lynn and Joy, and we conclude our roundtable this way. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.